Thank you so much. Good evening. I'm so happy to be able to be here. I want to thank Deirdre and Bridget for your trust in my story. As maybe most of you know, it's not easy to get translations into English as a European author, and I'm really, really happy about this, and that this comes true today. And I'd like to read, it feels strange now because it's the first time I'm reading a translation because I know English a bit, at least better than Turkish or Bulgarian.
You're very welcome to teach in German as well.
You will later on. Yes. Well, I decided to read a small excerpt of chapter 2 called Fennery Cave. We are going to talk about the title a little bit later. A Fennery Cave. Don't just stand in the doorway, says her aunt. Maya pushes herself away from the doorframe, taking a step forwards toward her aunt. Has it arrived? Asks Maya. Her aunt dries her wet hands on the tea towel, takes her knitted jacket down from the hook, slips into the right sleeve first, then the left. She always does the right side first. Closes 2 buttons, then rolls up her sleeves and turns back to the sink. Maya gives her aunt a sideways glance and, without a word, takes a tea towel and helps with the drying. The delicate Sunday china, white porcelain with a light blue pattern. The freshly dried plates and cups belong beneath the ones in the cupboard. Maya climbs onto a chair. Her aunt holds up 4 plates and Maya inserts 2 plates together under the stack. Her aunt has taught her this so that all the dishes are used in rotation. She can manage the cups on her own, and her aunt has already put the glasses on the oak shelf. Then comes the cutlery. Be careful, says her aunt, the knife is sharp. She says that every time, and Maya grasps it by the handle and dries the blade carefully. When her aunt isn't looking, she runs her finger cautiously along the blade before returning it to the kitchen drawer. The heavy pans are the only things that make her nervous, and she needs both hands to carry them to the table, drying the inside first, then turning them upside down to dry the base and handles. She leaves them on the table and her aunt hangs them up on the hooks. The sound as they strike the thick stone wall breaks the hour of silence. They don't talk during meals, and they are too busy taking care not to break anything while they are washing up. Talking is a distraction anyway. People talk too much, her aunt says. Maya hangs the tea towel on the back of the chair to dry. Her aunt pulls the sleeves of her jacket down to cover her wrists and rubs her reddened hands together. You can't cut yourself a slice of the past, she often says. Her aunt is an expert in cutting. She cuts bread, onions, bacon, carrots, tomatoes. She cooks with animal pots, reheats leftovers, bakes a cake on Sundays, simple cakes from yeast dough with crumble on top, or cakes with fruit. Maya gets the last dry piece on Thursdays after supper. Her aunt ensures that the child grows, that she's clean and gets plenty to eat. Constant questions don't satisfy you. She still needs to teach Maya that questions are for asking about someone else, the weather, if a person's hungry, or even whether the table has been set or the meal is ready. Usually, when it comes to our memory, especially childhood memory, we are convinced that we know our whole story, the story of our whole life. But the fact is that we kind of know little snippets, little bits. Some are true because we remember a situation, a smell maybe, but we also remember things other people told us, relatives, parents. We know things from family albums, and sometimes it's even lies told by somebody else, and we kind of fix them into our story, and then we are convinced of the truth of our memory. And I wanted to write a book that does not pretend to be a sting memoir, but it wanted it to more or less expose the fractures memory and the fractures of our life story. So,
Yeah.
and what I wanted to ask you, Deirdre, is what or why were you drawn to this book, to this story?
What and why? Well, the first thing that drew me to the book was I found it featured in New Books in German in 2015, and it had just won the European Prize for Literature. And I got hold of a copy shortly after that and read it and enjoyed it, but I was really intimidated. As a part-time student and would-be translator, I thought, somebody's going to pick this up and one of the big guns will get it. And it didn't happen. And I found then another short piece that Bridget mentioned, Eulen fliegen lautlos, owls fly soundlessly, and I translated part of that and got a commendation for it, and that's what went to No Man's Land initially. But then I was getting a bit braver, so I did the first chapter of this one for No Man's Land, and that was published online. And again, I put it away and forgot about it and thought, that's not going to happen. And then it did. And what attracted me was the style. It's poetic and it's spare. There's no wasted description. There's every single word in the book counts. And I liked the recurring phrases, unusual phrases, and the recurring motifs, the idea of light and darkness, shadow and sunshine. I also found it a very sensory experience reading it, from seeing things from the child's perspective standing in the doorway, to another chapter where Marek is cooking his supper, and the descriptions of what he's using, the preserved mushrooms and stuff, I could almost smell from the work. So that delighted me in reading it, and I just wanted to try and bring it into English. And I also felt that the characters were very, very real. I was rooting for Maya through the book. Wanting her to succeed, wanting her to, be happy and find a belonging. So, yeah.
When I write a book, I really enjoy being part of my figures, of the characters, and it's like putting on their skin, and I try to feel like they feel and see what they see, but I don't like to open their minds, and I'm not like what do you call surgeon? Somebody who cuts open your head. I don't know the word for it. And I don't like this, and I don't like trying to guess my character's thoughts. I'm just trying to be them more or less. And this is what I enjoy about writing, and maybe this is why you feel like you're in the situation and you smell what Maya smells and feels what she feels. Right. I guess it must have been hard to translate parts of the book. Am I right?
Yes. Yes, well, it's always, if you give your full attention to something, it's always difficult, even if it seems something easy. I suppose for some things I had an advantage from having spent quite a deal of time in Austria, so I would have been aware of some motifs and some kinds of phrase. Then there were ones that I was really afraid that there was a phrase and I had missed it or misunderstood. And one is that the ants, you can't cut a piece of the past, because the ant is always wanting to move forward. You have to start over again every time, is her Lebensphilosophy or life philosophy. And so initially I just translated it. Drafts 1, 2 and 3 had, you can't cut off a bit of the past. Then I panicked that I was missing something, that there was some idiom that I didn't know, so I put it out on the forum, and I got a wide variety of answers. Most of whom saying, no, I hadn't tried this, but my aunt used to say something like that, that kind of thing. So single word in the sentence, and then we finally got, you can't cut yourself a slice of the past. You know, if it was real Irish, you might say you can't cut a slice off of the past, but I thought that wouldn't run. Then there were things like the Downhill Hurler, the Feathery Cave, which I had seen Nick K. Store's translation of just a sample in the EUPL booklet, and he called it a down cave. And I wasn't very happy with that. Well, I didn't really want to copy either, but down, you know, is it something, you know, that's pressing down physically, or then somewhere else I saw eider down, and I thought, no, eider down won't work, because I'm thinking of, you know, the heavy old quilted things, or as it's can be quite American or super luxury, so I thought it's not that either. And we had quilt for a while. It was a quilt cave, and then I came, yeah, because the idea is a bit like the Mother Goose of the stories, and Frau Hull, who scatters the feathers of the story. So that's where the feathery cave came from. Yeah, what else had I? The Schatten and Schattenseite, which, as Carolina said in Tyrol, that's very real. That if you're on the shady side of a mountain, you're in shade all the time, and you're poorer, and you can't keep as many cattle or sheep or whatever. And the Sonnenseite being the, you know, where everybody wants to live and where you can go for wine or whatever. So I was trying to get that idea across, that shadowy and Schattenseite could also be the underbelly or the undesirable, generally undesirable. So we had shady, and then finally settled for shadowy. Or sorry, no, we settled for shady.
Lots of confusion.
Yeah.
When I read the book, it sounds so veteran, and it was really, I enjoyed reading it aloud.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it really feels like it was my book. It's a book I've written. It's not, it doesn't feel strange at all. And yeah, thank you so much for doing so much work.
There was one other thing that we found funny. Maya, as a stranger to the language of her aunt in the village where she grows up, or a stranger initially, she has the experience of language coming at her. So, you know, I had her aunt just speaking at her, and that's echoed in Marek's experience of coming as a enforced labourer from Poland to Austria during the war, and somebody speaks to her and says, "You're not good gehabt," and it's all, Carolina has written it all in one phrase. So I tried desperately to retain that, and we had the word glück, which again is a recurring thing, which is lucky and, you know, happiness and stuff. So there we kept it with you were in luck. So ran all that together. Whereas glück in other situations, like stilles Glück, Marek just trying to keep, you know, quiet happiness. We went to use happiness. And, yeah, so it's just trying to make things fit the situation. Schnapps was the other. Which wouldn't have struck me, but a colleague had difficulty with schnapps recently, in the last year or so. Not from drinking it, but her characters were two tough East Germans drinking schnapps, and her association with schnapps was, you know, the sweet American drink, Archer's peach schnapps or the like. So she felt she couldn't use it, but, you know, we went around the houses and I came back to schnapps.
And talking about Marek leads me to my own story.
Yeah.
I want to tell you a little bit about it, because it's not an autobiographic book, but some things are true. I'm accidentally Austrian. My mother grew up in the east of Poland, near the Belarusian border, and as a child she wasn't allowed to talk her mother tongue anymore. I think that she was 8 or 9 years old. Her mother tongue was a kind of a Belarusian dialect, and she was forced to speak Polish and later on Russian. And my father is a child of Polish people as well. They had to flee during the war, and they settled down in Hanover, in the enemy's country. But the enemies turned out to be the angels afterwards, because if they had gone back to Poland, they would have been killed by the Russians. So a very, very complicated family story. And accidentally, my parents moved to Austria, and they met at Innsbruck, where I live, fell in love, and so that's the beginning of my story. And I spoke Polish until I was 5 years old. And then I was forced to speak German, because my parents wanted us to speak German properly. And teachers also forced us, and with the consequence that I completely forgot and lost my mother tongue. And I didn't think about this for years, until I wrote my thesis about Elias Canetti. I wrote down the title of the book. It's called The Tongue Set Free in English, Die gerettete Zunge in German. And there he writes about completely the same experience, because he grew up in Bulgaria, and he later on remembered the stories of his childhood in English, and he talks about secret translation. And when I read this, I thought, oh my god, this is my story, because, for example, I remember Piotr Pan. I still have the it's called in English, not the CDs, the LP. I still own it, Piotr Pan in Polish, and I remember it in German. So strange things happen. And I thought, thinking about this topic, and I wanted to get deeper into it, and I did lots of research about how language, how important language is for our identity, how it forms our thoughts, our way of thinking, and then I thought I have to write a book about it. And I wanted it to be a universal story. I didn't want it to be my story. It is not of any importance that it's a Belarusian mother here. It might be any mother anywhere in the world. It's about a person being pulled out by the roots and not knowing who she is. So basically, yeah. I see that we are running out of time, but we wanted to read a small excerpt in German, and then you could read the translation too.
Yeah.
And I want to invite everybody to talk without us afterwards, if you have more questions. Maybe drink a glass of wine and talk about the books in our lives. So it's on page 134. So I think this is the Schlüsselszene of the book, like the heart of the book. It comes very late, but don't worry, it won't spoil the story. Viele Geschichten haben die meine berührt, und sie verändern sich, vermischen sich. Manchmal kann ich nicht einmal sagen, wo die eine aufhört und die andere anfängt. Ich habe sie mir zu eigen gemacht, ausgeliehen, weitergebracht, zu weit vielleicht, und umgehängt wie einen Tarnmantel. Aber jetzt möchte ich in meine eigene Geschichte hineinfahren. Das Dorf, das Tal meiner Kindheit gegen eine Landschaft halten, die mir verborgen geblieben ist.
Many stories have touched mine. They change and blend, and sometimes I cannot even say where one ends and the next begins. I have made them my own, borrowed them, thought onwards, too far perhaps, and wrapped them around me like a camouflage coat. But now I want to move into my own story, to hold the village and valley of my childhood up against the landscape that remained concealed from me.
Thank you so much. I think that you did a really, really great job, and I think it's important that you have the last word. And I would like you to read your favorite part of the book, because this was my
Yes. It's from the last chapter again, from his journey. Let me write to you so that the words do not get tangled and the sentences flow properly. Or else I can throw the paper away so that it can dissolve in the water-filled ditches in the marsh, so it can catch in the weeds clawing with yellow brightness onto the railway bank. So I can fold it up and it is possible for you to roam smoothly through my words, so that my voice is in your head and not in your ear.
Maybe Deidre, if you could talk a little bit more about your experience of, transitioning into translation yourself, but getting started in that way.
It's I would say it's still very, very much an experimental process, and I'm very, very glad that I am not economically dependent on it. I can pick and choose. I have been offered short pieces of work to do, extracts and things, and at outrageously low prices, some of which I was tempted to take because I was interested, but it's not fair to people who are depending on that. It just brings everybody down. I've always been interested in languages, and I worked in primary languages when there were primary languages here, so I was translating things for that. Then I decided to try and learn to do it properly.
And have you done any writing yourself?
I have done little bits of writing, mostly when I'd be locked in a room or on a workshop or something, and forced to do it. And then in work I got a little bit braver about it. I was also very, very interested in writers who write in a second language. There's an whole Austrian tradition like Canetti and Ulrich von Horvath and all those people, so I read a lot of their work and I was really interested. So I started working, and the first time I was given a poem told to translate a poem for the next week in Warwick, I nearly had a fit, and then I settled down and thought, I really like doing this. So I started doing more and more. Now I have several books in the laptop at home that I've pitched and they haven't flown. So I would love to be, asked to do something I really wanted to do. It's pretty cutthroat, and it's hard to break in. And I think both times I've been lucky with the two books that did this one and Don Carlo, the children's book. So it's not that I want to put people off. Like, it's quite fun doing it, but it would be very difficult to make a living.
Does the narrative of a time frame, when you inherit character mind, present, is it set in the present century? Does the narrative have a time frame?
Does it have a time frame? Not really.
No, but mine does have a phone as a young adult. So we're talking early 21st century.
I tried to make it universal also from this point of view. But it must have been after the Second World War. So
Second borders or
something like that.
The character Marek is from the Second World War.
So
that would be
he was like
he's
a
older
forced
than-
worker who had to come to Austria. Let's beat Austria, and he couldn't come back because there wasn't anything to go back. And I was doing a lot of research on this topic as well. I'm always doing lots of research, but in fact, I don't want the readers to know when they read the book. I try to forget everything because before I start the writing process.
Can I ask which countries you find that are more open to publishing work in translation?
Eastern European countries are very open, and yes, and actually they were the first who were interested in translating my book. The very first was, I forgot, I didn't tell you today, the very first was Spanish, French, I don't know, but then the Eastern European countries. Because what I think is very, very interesting, and I found out about this when I went to Ukraine at, I think it was 2.5 years ago. They told me that translation kind of makes their own language important. Because when you start translating books, for example, into the Ukrainian language, then it tells everybody around that Ukrainian language is a language that is important. And it's the same in other countries. So a Georgian publishing house, it was the same topic there. It was interesting in Croatia and Serbia, because there we have a contrary thing, that they start separating the languages. And the book first came out in Croatia, and then I went to Serbia, and they really, really tried not to use the same words and not to use the same sentence structures. Yeah, it was very interesting.
I was curious about what you said about Pete Schnapps. I'm thinking, been translating it, I'm thinking, I don't really want to have it in kind of American English, or and then you were talking about not wanting to have off like a kind of an Irish English idiom. But do you, as a translator, do you kind of go for neutral, standard world English, or are you aware of different Englishes
Yes.
when you're translating this?
Yes. Yes. And there are a few real Irishisms buried in there. I suppose I'm getting a bit more confident about putting them in. My husband's English, and he said, "Can't say that." So I kind of forgot.
Does the reader understand?
Yes. Yes.
There are also different Germans, and this sounds like a very Hochdeutsch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very happy that this book comes out in Ireland, because I think the Austrian people, we have a problem because we have Big Brother Germany and the German, and we don't like that at all. We Austrians usually like the melody of the language and the grammar and the words, but there are still differences between Eastern Austria and the West, where I'm from, and so this is very interesting, and I'm very happy that I'm not in New York. Dublin.
Just a thought, really, and it kind of leads from what you were just saying, but does it kind of make you re-engage with the book yourself? I mean, it's a very meta kind of book, because it's about, that is a word, it's about losing your language and then translating the past and other meanings and so on. And here we are in a process where you're translating the book again, and it's in a, it's in an Irish context where it's like another language is looming over it as well. Is it difficult? I mean, there's so many layers. I mean, I guess the Russian doll thing is perfect. Does it make you, as the original writer, re-engage or rethink?
I told Deirdre that it somehow feels like a palimpsest, not a well-made one, and it really feels like it's my story. I couldn't write it in English that way, of course, and I'm aware of the fact, but no, it doesn't make me rethink about things, because the story is the same. The story and the pictures, and I think when you're going to read the book, you will pictures, and this is also how our memory works, because we memorize pictures, usually memorize pictures better than words, and so it doesn't feel strange at all.
Where does it have the strongest sales of the 15 translators? Which country has responded best to the story? Is it Red or Polish?
This one hasn't been translated into Polish. I don't know why. They translated the short novella Eulen fliegen laut aus. It was in Italy, I guess, and I was very surprised, and in Spain, very surprised about it. In Italy, I was in Sardinia, and they told me, "Wow, you told our story," because they have the same problem with the dialect. And it was very strong, and lots of newspapers wrote about it, and it was really a topic there. Sometimes it's a pity I don't know how important the book is, because I can't read the newspapers, and just I get an email from publishers and say, well, we are very happy with it, but well, I don't know how happy they are.
Which was your favourite cover of all the design?
That's interesting, because this is one of my favorite ones. It resembles me a lot of the Ukrainian one. This is red. If you're interested, on my website I have sort of a gallery with all the covers. So the Ukrainian is very similar to this, but it's red. I like that. And I like the Italian one because they picked a very small scene of the book, which is very important. And I like the Italian one. I don't like the original one.